George Janko's friendship with Logan Paul has officially fallen apart. After countless episodes spent in silence, being humiliated by Logan in front of their guests, and even Logan criticizing George's religion, it was obvious that George's relationship with the Impaulsive Podcast, and more specifically Logan Paul, had crumbled. However, it's been almost 1 year since he officially left the Impaulsive Podcast, and countless dramas have popped up ever since. My name's Ryan Pictures, and we're gonna explore the new controversies with George exposing his past experiences on Impaulsive. But a quick summary: in 2023, George's departure from Impaulsive was marked by little clues over time, such as him unfollowing Logan and Mike Malak on social media, and his picture removed from the podcast's logo. Even though George launched his own podcast and assured fans he wasn't leaving Impaulsive, he gradually appeared less and eventually stopped showing up altogether. In April 2023, George hinted at problems with the tweet reading, "I wasn't going to talk, but now I am," which he later confirmed on his new podcast with guest Tana Mojo.
Or me and Jeff can have you right on Jeff FM and we'll have the new Impaulsive. Watch out, Logan. Watch out.
Put me in a spot where no one looks at me or talks to me so I feel like
Absolutely.
how I used to feel.
The trouble seemed to peak in episode 351 of Impaulsive, featuring comedian Bobby Lee. During this episode, George shared a personal story about his religion.
For 2 years of my life recently was the hardest years of my life. I gained 40 pounds of weight. Honestly, if I was not Christian, I'd probably be suicidal. And it was really, really bad. I never told anybody about it. I just couldn't understand why I got everything that I've ever prayed for, but yet I was so unbelievably depressed.
Bobby Lee then responded with a joke.
It was just a long monologue.
He was just waiting.
Let me just say something. I loved what you were saying. It was just very long.
And George, feeling hurt, walked off of the set.
There are certain...
He is clocked out.
Yeah, I know.
George has been under a tremendous amount of abuse.
No,
No, stop, George. I want you over here with me. George, I want you over here with me. Chase him down.
Logan and Bobby criticized George's reaction, while Mike showed him some support. Although George and Bobby later apologized to each other, the incident was a turning point. Fans criticized George for sharing such a personal story on a comedy podcast, especially with a comedian like Bobby Lee. George later claimed that the episode was edited in order to make him look bad and hide the real reason why he actually left.
That Bobby Lee episode was edited, and they made me look like I wasn't a comedian that can't take a joke, even though every episode they make jokes on. And the reason I walked away was definitely not put in there.
Many thought George was too serious for the show's comedic style. This was seen in episodes with guests like Shaquille O'Neal.
And I read the Bible a lot when they talk about David and Goliath. I've never seen a giant, and so like I'm literally just, I'm a little taken.
You've been sitting over here for 30 minutes and that's all you can say? You kidding me?
No, he's not gonna say
That's
shit.
the question. Jeez.
I'm just sitting.
Are you drunk?
And Sebastian Maniscalco, where George struggled to join in the humor. Logan's treatment of George also added to the tension. Logan often dismissed or mocked George's jokes, which was a stark contrast with the way he treated Mike with respect.
Before you go, George, I just want to say,
Man, that's different.
Even I'm sorry to interrupt, George.
This difference was clear in episodes where Logan openly made fun of George's Christian beliefs.
I know people that hate me, that treat me better about my faith than you, and you're my best friend.
I just am definitely questioning why we have to perpetuate a belief that is f***ing silly.
Which upset many fans and further strained their relationship. It didn't take long for viewers to find connections between George's departure and the past exits of other co-hosts on Impaulsive, suggesting a recurring problem. Spencer left for Hawaii, and Mac's departure was controversial, partly because of Mike's behavior. But the story doesn't end there. In episode 380 of Impaulsive, long after George had left, Logan specifically seemed to take more jabs at George. Because there was a segment where Logan's comment about how little views George's new podcast was getting, which was actually muted, and fans quickly knew it was about George.
People watch, and without people watching, I just have a show like
This led them to share tweets and clips on social media, trying to get George's attention. This shows that even though George was no longer involved, Logan still found ways to mock him. George eventually responded to these instances with a tweet on May 5th saying, "To the Impaulsive fans, I'm so sorry I can't speak about things. Not my choice. I do love you guys, and for those of you sending me the clip of them talking shit, it's all love. I've already moved on from that toxic environment." Additionally, Logan's recent controversies, including a scam called CryptoZoo, have damaged his image even more. Fans now doubt whether Logan has really changed or if his behavior towards George and others shows deeper issues. George's new podcast offers him a chance to show his personality reality without the toxic dynamics of Impaulsive. Sounds like a happy ending, right? Well, it's been almost a year since George left Impaulsive, and there's been tons of newly revealed information, giving us a deeper look into what exactly happened with George and how Mike may have had a bigger hand in his departure than we thought, and that the Impaulsive team, specifically Logan, were working directly against George. In a recent 2.5-hour podcast posted on May 9, 2024, George Janko and Mike Malak finally addressed the true reasons behind George's departure from Impaulsive. The podcast begins by addressing the infamous Bobby Lee episode where George Janko walked out, leading many to believe he couldn't handle a joke.
Tremendous amount of abuse. No.
In fact, a lot of fans criticized George because of this, saying that he was just too sensitive and that he was ruining Bobby's experience on the show. George clarifies that the situation was much more complex than viewers originally thought. And even worse, Bobby wasn't nearly as innocent as he was made out to be. George reveals that the editing of the episode made him look significantly worse than he actually was, cutting out crucial context that would have shown the true nature of his frustration.
Okay, the Bobby Lee situation.
Who was the first person that jumped off the couch and said, George just left, that was not good, we have to fix the situation?
But did they not cut shit that you should have stood up for me and said, hey, you can't cut that shit? That's gonna make him look like an idiot for leaving.
George had already mentioned this months ago, but this time, Mike was here to confirm this. He basically agrees, saying that they have to edit the episodes to protect the guests.
We have numerous times on the show, which I'm sure a number of shows do, cut things that we believe will protect the integrity or reputation of the guest.
That protected nobody but him.
No, of the guest. That's what I'm trying.
Well, what about the guy that you break bread with, bro?
George explains that his issue wasn't just with Bobby Lee's jokes, but with his inappropriate behavior. He felt disrespected and physically harassed by Bobby, who repeatedly grabbed him inappropriately.
He started the episode putting his balls in my face. I let that one go. Then every 2 seconds, he kept grabbing my dick.
I don't think...
How would you feel if a man that has his back completely towards you, that only turns around to grab your dick,
right,
talk shit to your face, and you can't smack or beat the living brakes off of this?
Many people thought Mike's phrasing of protect the guests was a weird way to frame the situation, because then that implies that Bobby Lee was the one who needed to be protected and that he was the victim, whereas in reality, it was George that was the victim of the whole ordeal. But it still made sense why they quote needed to protect the guest's reputation, because after all, if word got out that Bobby had been sexually harassing George so much that he walked off set, then that would be horrible for his career and would potentially alienate future guests. This means that Logan, Mike, and the rest of the Impaulsive team would rather protect Bobby, the harasser, instead of George, who was supposed to be one of Mike and Logan's closest friends and was clearly the victim in this situation. And even after being humiliated and harassed, Logan Paul insisted that George apologized to Bobby, telling him that his job on Impaulsive was on the line if he didn't back down.
Because Logan makes me apologize to this man, or I don't have a job on Impaulsive anymore. How fucking crazy is it?
This actually brings up an interesting point about how George had called Logan in the middle of Bobby's podcast to apologize.
I want to apologize for my behavior on your podcast. I feel like I was a little...
Bobby Lee, you shut your mouth. I'm apologizing to you. I left you. You were our guest.
Looking back now, this section of the podcast felt extremely scripted and made it seem as if Logan had told George in advance to call him during the podcast to apologize. Last year, people favored Bobby Lee and blamed George for walking out of the podcast. However, now, the tide has turned. People are pointing out how weird it was for Bobby not having spoken up for George and criticizing what he did towards him. Bobby Lee is a huge weirdo for this. He should have spoke up for George and changed the narrative against George. Knowing the true context behind Bobby's harassment, it's easy to see why people thought George apologizing to Bobby was hard to watch, because in truth, it should have been Bobby apologizing to George. Additionally, with the way that George apologizes, it almost sounds sarcastic. He calls Bobby a prince of comedy and clearly oversells how sorry he actually is.
There's not a day I will lay my head on that pillow and not know that I disappointed a prince that does stand up like you.
And that's because George isn't sorry, since he knew he was the actual victim in the scenario. You can even see a brief moment where George snaps and calls Logan a manipulator at the end.
Because Logan was gaslighting me, he's an asshole.
Exactly. Exactly.
I told you it was my fault.
It was your fault. Yeah.
My friend Parallax also told me an interesting point about what made George's apology even worse. Because you see, when Logan Paul addressed the essay allegations involving David Dobrik in 2021, Logan clearly stressed the importance of taking accountability and learning from mistakes.
Just take accountability and really understand the situation.
However, when it came to George, Logan did not hold Bobby Lee accountable for his inappropriate behavior. Instead of standing up for what's right, Logan remained silent, indicating that he doesn't genuinely care about the allegations. It's evident that Logan's primary concern is maintaining his public image. Logan would continue to dismiss all of George's concerns. He didn't care about what the audience would think of George or how the episode would affect him.
And this is gonna make me look really bad.
No.
And he says, I don't give a what you look like. Bro, come on, dog. You were standing right next to me when he said that. Dog, nobody felt safe in that. You don't even feel safe in that.
But this wouldn't be the end of it. While fans had already suspected that George was being purposely ignored by Logan in favor of Mike, what George would say next would ultimately confirm it. George would reveal that on his 30th birthday, the Impaulsive team deliberately scheduled 3 episodes, knowing he couldn't attend, basically sidelining him off the show.
And then on my birthday, you guys shot 3 episodes, so I couldn't show up.
I just think
on my 30th birthday, you shot 3 episodes. Bro.
I think
that's crazy. It was on the calendar for months.
From the get-go, George was already known to have a hard time connecting with guests because of numerous reasons, like his sitting position and how often Logan would shut down his jokes. But this time, it was clear that the Impaulsive team didn't even care about whether or not he was in the episode. Compare this with the favoritism that Mike receives. Mike has been in every single episode of Impaulsive, but the moment George needs to leave, they continue to shoot episodes. Soon enough, even a single mention of George's name was snubbed. Under every single Impaulsive video, George claims that you won't see a single comment with his name on it because Logan and his team had shadow banned his name just so that viewers couldn't even mention him.
And you guys shadow banned my name. Fans would screenshot shots of them trying to talk about me, and you guys were banned my name.
Because we probably didn't want that conversation over fucking hauling the entirety of the show.
But also, it's like, bro, I walked away without saying a thing, and you guys were on the podcast saying this gets no views.
But Logan just wouldn't stop. Even when George had officially left Impaulsive, Logan still found ways to antagonize and attack George. This was because George had secured a sponsorship deal with the energy drink company Celsius for the new podcast he was planning. Since Logan is a co-founder of the competing energy drink Prime, he must have felt like this was somehow done against him, and he'd tell George not to accept the sponsorship.
He says, if I take Celsius, I'm not a part of Impaulsive.
Then he told you that if you take Celsius, that you cannot continue to be on Impaulsive, which is the core driver for Prime, as you're going to continue to funnel viewership from the Impaulsive show back to your show, which promotes a competitive product.
Logan made it clear to George that accepting the Celsius sponsorship would be seen as direct betrayal. He explicitly warned George that if he went ahead with the deal, he would be permanently banned from appearing on Impaulsive. George, trying to handle the situation smoothly, offered to take a smaller deal with Celsius to avoid any more drama. He hoped this would be a fair compromise, letting him keep his friendship with Logan and any future appearances on Impaulsive. But Logan wasn't having it. He flat out refused to help George financially and even told him to go ask his family for money instead.
And then I said, well, what do you want me to do for my bills, bro? I got no money. And he says, go have your rich dad pay for it.
Listen,
that's fighting words, bro. Look at me. That's fighting words, bro. You don't bring up somebody's father.
Would you say that the way that you handled it from a word standpoint was mature, acceptable?
What did I say? That I beat the brakes off of him?
Correct.
If he was in front of me, I would have swung him.
Despite his loyalty and contributions to the show, George felt he had no choice but to step away for his own well-being, especially after all the abuse, humiliation, and harassment he had suffered at the hands of Logan. But Logan wasn't going to let George get away with this. After George had exposed everything that happened behind closed doors, Logan decided to release a statement of his own using a 4-minute TikTok. Just from this, viewers were already left with a bad taste in their mouth. While George had worked on an entire hour-long podcast episode, Logan only released a 4-minute response, which wasn't nearly enough to talk about all of the points that George had mentioned in his podcast. George mentioned on the podcast that the reason why he started his own show was because he wasn't making enough money from Impaulsive. He said he was spending $10,000 a month and earning $5,000 from Impaulsive.
When Logan came after me for my religion, the show hit rock bottom and we weren't getting paid. I was getting paid $5,000 a month, and that's covering just Reed. I have a mortgage, I have my sister that works for me, I have Belle, I'm trying to get married, I had all these things. So I had to start my own show because we're not making money on this show and I'm getting pushed out of this show.
Well, at the time we weren't making money. You made money on the show.
But at the time, we're a couple months.
How much money did you make over the course
I can show you my books. I was spending 10 G's a month being on.
Logan responded by showing that George was reimbursed $20,000 for his expenses and implied George was exaggerating.
I had to start my own show because we're not making money on the show and I'm getting pushed out.
You made money on the show.
I can show you my books. I was spending 10 G's a month being on the show.
All right, let's talk about this. Obviously, I wasn't on the podcast to represent myself, so I'd like to clarify a few things that were said. As well as having his own credit card, all expenses related to the show were paid for, including all travel and lodging. Obviously, George's total reimbursement came out to $20,000, 317 cents. I'd love to see any books that show otherwise. Spending $120,000 a year to be on a show is a little confusing.
However, Logan's response was misleading. George was talking about a specific tough period where Logan insulted his religion, leading to low pay and high personal expenses. The YouTuber Kavos perfectly explains the situation.
So the context that Logan leaves out is George is specifically referring to the time when Logan Paul bashed on his religion and his beliefs, saying that the show hit rock bottom and that he only got paid $5K a month. He then said he had a load of expenses to pay for, like his employees, mortgage, a wedding. So to me, when he's referring to his books, it seems very much like he's referring to his own finances, anywhere in the region of $10K a month, where Impaulsive was only paying him $5K a month. So he's making a loss. His income isn't covering his expenses on a show like Impaulsive, one of the most popular shows in the world. $5K a month is a lot of money, but that is not George Janko's worth on a show like that, which generates millions. Even Mike backs up George's statement about that specific period of time, also saying that at the time, we weren't making money.
Well, at the time, we weren't making money.
Logan wasn't afraid to show off how much money he made, even though one of his co-hosts was dealing with his own personal expenses. George said that Logan even went as far as to send screenshots bragging about making $11 million a week.
Trying to throw viewers off and make George out to be an idiot, when the reality, the crux of it, is that George was being truthful.
This is a guy who's sending us screenshots of $11 million a week that he's making.
This statement is so crazy that it's almost laughable. That would mean I'm making $572 million a year. I'm nowhere near that. What happened was Prime had a very successful month. I think we did like 60 to 70 million, and I sent it to our group chat because I was proud of the business. I was stoked to show the boys, and I think George maybe misinterpreted that as like my personal income.
Okay.
Logan dismissed this as a misunderstanding, explaining that Prime had one successful month, and he shared those numbers within their group chat. Logan made it sound like George was confused, but George was actually referring to that one-time screenshot and not his regular weekly income.
Replay the start about how baffled Logan is by this point.
This statement is so crazy that it's almost laughable.
It's like, whoa, this is a crazy statement, what the hell? Then proceed to say he did actually send screenshots of how much money he was making.
Prime had a very successful month. I think we did like 60 to 70 million, and I sent it to our group chat.
Through Prime, and then blames George for getting confused.
On top of this, Logan also revealed that George made $317,000 in the 15 months he was on Impaulsive.
I don't know he bleeped it out, but George made $317,000 in the 15 months that he got paid for on Impaulsive.
This didn't sit well with a lot of people, because George had never denied making good money.
So for me, it's so cheap and weird to bring up George's actual finances and money he's made when he admitted he made a lot of money on the show.
And he was simply talking about a difficult time when his expenses outweighed his income. Logan sharing George's private finances came off to the audience as unnecessary and manipulative. In fact, disclosing an employee's private expenses could potentially be illegal under certain circumstances. One of the major things that cemented how horribly Logan was treating George was the fact that he basically confirmed that he didn't want George to accept the Celsius sponsorship.
He told me that I couldn't take Celsius.
So this is the big one. Making calls, trying to make it seem like I wanted to control his show is absolutely ridiculous. As you can see right here, I was like, hey, we got to get you Prime because I saw him drinking our competitor, and he told me to call him. He was filming my reaction to tell me he took a deal with a competitor. I told him, please don't film. Like, I'd like to talk about this. I hope you're joking, by the way. The truth is, I thought it was a bad look that my best friend and co-host took a brand deal with our competitor without consulting me, asking me, giving us even a chance to match it before he signed the deal. Regardless, I did tell him I can't have him on Impaulsive if he's going to take the deal with the competitor, but if after he makes the money he wants to come back to the podcast, he's more than welcome.
So Logan confirms in that he actually did tell George if he takes a Celsius deal, he will not be on Impaulsive anymore.
Logan had no right to do this. It wasn't as if George had signed a contract with Logan that kept him from accepting any outside sponsorships. This was clearly just a way for Logan to try and control George's earnings. It was obvious by now that Logan was simply trying to manipulate the audience and clip George's podcast while excluding all the context in order to fit his narrative. Because on top of all the previous points, Logan also tried to counter George's point that no one had contacted George when he got fired, when in reality, George did say that Logan had contacted him.
Next, Logan touches on George saying that no one called him when he got fired.
Not you, not Caleb, not Kevin, not Dylan. Nobody called me when I got fired.
George did not get fired. He quit. I'll touch on that in a second. But after he quit, I called him frequently.
As I said, common theme here. Logan cuts the clip a few seconds short for his benefit because George literally after that sentence says that the only person who called him was Logan.
Not you, not Caleb, not Kevin, not Dylan. Nobody called me when I got fired. Not one person called me. You know what I get a call from? Logan saying, at least Mike wouldn't do this.
George admitted himself that you did call him.
By the time that Logan's response had ended, fans were left scratching their heads. He didn't mention anything about Bobby Lee and George's sexual harassment, and viewers wondered if it was because of the TikTok's length or simply because Logan wanted to ignore it. Either way, it was likely a combination of the two. Logan's response avoided the real issues George brought up, like the religious comments and the lack of support from the team. Instead, Logan spends the entire video shutting down every single accusation George throws at him, trying to make it seem as if everything he had ever done was just for George's well-being, when it was actually the complete opposite. But if there's one thing that's clear throughout this whole situation, it's that the relationship between George and Logan has been thoroughly destroyed.